Today we'll be hearing from Diane Roussin of the Winnipeg Boldness Project, particularly about some of the details of their child-centered model and their multi-sectoral collaborative efforts to contribute to the systems change and reconciliation. I just wanted to give a bit of a background on the project for those of you who may not be as familiar. The Winnipeg Boldness Project is a research and development initiative working alongside the North End community to identify effective mechanisms that will improve outcomes for young children in the Point Douglas area. And the project is working towards a bold goal. Children and families in Point Douglas will experience dramatically improved well-being in all aspects of self: physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual. The project has the following objectives. Number one, design a 6-year early childhood development intervention strategy for future implementation that will help young children in Point Douglas develop the tools they need to succeed in life. Number two, create a strength-based narrative that highlights the positive and spirited aspects of Winnipeg's North End through community perspectives. And number three, build a child-centered model focusing on best practices for raising children through the deep community wisdom that exists within the North. It is absolutely my great pleasure to introduce our guest, Diane Roussin, who's here joining us today, who will probably do a much better job telling us more about the work that the Winnipeg Boldness Project has been undertaking. Diane is the project director at the Winnipeg Boldness Project, and she is a passionate community leader committed to the pursuit of pimatsuin, the good life, for all family and children. Her in-depth knowledge of Indigenous issues and solutions flow directly from her strong sense of identity and worldview as a proud member of the Skowhenan First Nation. She holds both Bachelor of Arts and Bachelor of Social Work degrees as well. Welcome, Diane, and thank you again for joining us on today's broadcast. Over to you.
Awesome. Thanks, Galen. So hello, everyone, and welcome to virtually to Winnipeg in our offices here. As Galen has said, I'm here to talk about our project and what it is we're trying to accomplish here. And some of the basics, again, just to recap what Galen has already said to you in this slide, is that we are a social R&D project, a research and development project. We're using this platform of a social lab to do our research and development. And we're really trying to shoot for systems change here and trying to figure out how it is we can use a lot of the wisdom that's around us, around our families and our community, and how it is we can design some solutions that we think holds out a lot of potential for systems change. And when I say systems change, what that means for us is that there would be such better and improved outcomes for our children and for our families in all aspects of their life. And we like to use medicine wheel teachings here, and so we talk about the physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual aspects of children's lives. We are focused on a particular neighborhood in Winnipeg, and so Galen, I know you earlier said the north, because Winnipeg is hardly north, so I just wanted to, it's actually the North End. Point Douglas neighborhood characterization is affectionately known as the North End, plus a couple of other neighborhoods attached to it. So that is the geographical neighborhood that we're working in. And again, it's typically called the North End, it's typically called the inner city. I think that more often than not, the neighborhood is described by a lot of negative characteristics, and what we're trying to do here at the Boldness Project, as Galen said, with one of our goals and objectives, is to try to change that narrative, because we feel that there's just as much strength in this neighborhood as there are challenges, and it's from that place of strength that we're trying to start in this project, and it's from that strength that we're trying to build the solutions and the systems change that we're talking about. So I think at the heart of it, what we're trying to do is bring together the deep community wisdom that exists in this neighborhood and put that together with a lot of the cutting edge, mainstream kinds of early childhood science that we know is out there, and there is a lot of it. So how can we bring those two things together to create these solutions and these innovations that we're talking about? So Next slide. So at the end of the day, we're into our 5th year now, and the first year of our project was all about doing a deep dive into the neighborhood and really talking to folks in this neighborhood and a lot of parents of the children that we're actually talking about. And at the outset, some of the data, some of the research, some of the numbers told us that kids in this particular neighborhood are showing up at school less than ready, and their scores and measurements that were telling us that, and so the numbers were low. And so we decided at the outset that we're going to go in and talk to the neighborhood, talk to community, talk to parents of those kids, and find out what it is they think, find out what does success of their children mean to them. And they told us a lot of things. And so from part of what they told us was there's a way of working in our community, there's a way of working with our kids, there's a way of working with our families that I think our families are asking for. And if we could all just work in that way, that we would achieve that systems change that we're really hoping for. And all of that to me gets summed up in what we are now calling our child-centered model. And we didn't have this at the very beginning, and this is sort of where we've ended up now. So it's a model, and the language of our community is that we call it ways of knowing, being, doing, and feeling. And a more sort of mainstream way of describing that is to say that it's a holistic early childhood development model. And so this visual here represents images that our community picked to represent what we were talking about with the model, a visual representation of the model. And so you see the concentric circles, which has the child at center, because we know we all believe that children are sacred. And so how is it that we can all get around kids to support kids? And so you see the different kinds of supports that surround children. As well, there's the Venn diagram on the other side represents sort of this overlapping, interconnected, holistic way of viewing people and viewing our children. And so that's the ways of knowing, being, doing, and feeling. And then the rest, if you look at any one of those words in that wordle, you could probably do a couple of theses just on any one of those words. But a lot of these words are sort of value-based, and they represent approaches and ways that we view our community, view our families, and ways that we interact with one another. So this has now become our theory of change. And I did say that we are a social lab, and we are, I mean, the long and the short of a social lab is that we're designing prototypes, and we're looking at how we can scale those prototypes. And what I will say is that this model, I think, is a representation of the deepest of wisdom in our neighborhood. And we are designing all of our prototypes from this model. And when we are looking to have partners to scale the prototypes, it's based on this model and the values and principles that are embodied in this model that we're hoping to move forward in. And I do believe that a lot of this is on our website if people want to go and look at this, and I think this is going to be made available later. What I will say, because part of this webinar is talking about collaboration, and I do know that lots of folks on this call probably collaborate a lot and know a lot about that. And so what I will say about this particular neighborhood, Boldness, when Boldness started as a project, it began from a foundation of intergenerational networks of relationships that have existed in this neighborhood for quite some time. So the level of collaboration in the north end of Winnipeg has been high for a very long time. And in fact, I think I've heard across Winnipeg that there's often been envy about how well folks in the north end work together. So this project started from, again, I say intergenerations. There's, that I know of, at least 3 generations of leaders that have been mentoring each other, teaching one another, and passing down this way of working and this wisdom, and really moving forward our collective knowledge. And so the Boldness really, you know, was in a privileged place to start with such a long-standing set of relationships already intact, as well as the collective wisdom throughout the generations that those relationships lead to. So what we were really trying to do at the outset was surface the community ideas, and we know that there's a lot of, as I said, a lot of collaboration in this neighborhood to begin with, but we know that the collaboration in order to make what our families are saying to us and what are the solutions and that our families are suggesting to us that are in the prototypes, we know we need to go beyond this neighborhood in order to scale those. And so there's been a lot of work in the latter few years of building those networks for collaboration. So this just represents some of the folks. The bottom, we have 4 ongoing circles that meet on a regular basis, and this is examples of those 4, well, 3 are represented there. But we have 4 in total, as well as a board of directors, as well as a funders table. And and those meet on a very regular basis, but we're constantly having different kinds of get-togethers, check-ins, you know, consults, just gatherings to try to continue to keep the conversation going and to keep those collaborations very alive and present and constantly iterating and constantly building upon the ideas that are coming forward in the Boldness Project. So again, a lot of the stuff's on our website, but the 4 guide groups that we have are the parent guide group, and so that's when you'll see the picture on the bottom. And so we have a set of parents who come on a very regular basis through all kinds of challenges. I'm telling you, folks overcome a lot of challenges to come to our meetings. And what they've told us, not only they're the starting point for a lot of our prototype design and co-creation sessions, and we start there and then we move out. And our families have told us all along the way that they feel really important in this work, that they feel they're represented, that they feel they're being heard, and that they feel that their ideas are being taken on and taken somewhere. So we're pretty proud of that our parents really feel that way. And so we've tried to really ensure that when it gets into the research side of it with all of our documentation, that they are very connected to the research documents as well. And so that, you know, once the stuff gets written down and put into, you know, some wordy words and 40 pages and citations and, you know, all these very important research documents, that they don't lose connection with their wisdom, because it's their wisdom that's in those documents. Top corner, we have what we call our community leadership guide group, and that really is mostly a lot of the different leadership, formal and informal, in this neighborhood. Tends to be a lot of executive directors of organizations as well as community leaders, and yet a lot of those folks also live in the neighborhood. Like we always say, we live, work, and play in this neighborhood. And so again, folks who've been around for a very long time, who have been in the community for a very long time, and just really know how to work with families and really know what families are asking for in terms of solutions when we are faced with all these complex challenges. Our families are very sophisticated and they're very straightforward, and it seems pretty clear to me what they're asking for. And in a perfect world, it seems pretty straightforward in terms of delivering it to them, but it seems to me we create these very complex systems that just can't respond to what families are asking for. The third picture you'll see there's our Knowledge Keepers guide group, and so we felt very strongly that we needed to have knowledge keepers, and that tends to be elders, cultural advisors, and folks who are really coming to us from that place of knowing, and they guide us and they ask the tough questions and they encourage us to look to all aspects of the project and to treat the project like, as earlier I said, with the medicine wheel. You know, we are heavy on our intellect here, and so we like to do that, but the elders really remind us that we need to continuously connect with our emotional well-being of this project, with the spiritual well-being of this project, and with the physical well-being of this project. So we build ceremony into all of our processes. We'll do the pipe ceremonies, we'll do the celebrations, we'll do the medicine pickings. We use the medicines in all of our get-togethers. We pass a lot of tobacco to a lot of people in this neighborhood, because we've had some really significant teachings around tobacco and what we do when we pass tobacco. And so and then the fourth one, which you don't see represented there, is our research guide group. And that is made up of, you know, folks who know a lot about research. And so they tend to be doctors of this and doctors of that. And they really help us think through and bring that expertise around, you know, how to do the research side of the community wisdom. How do we take that community wisdom and document in this research way, because the community wisdom lives in our hearts and it lives in our beings, and a lot of the community wisdom in the North End has not been written down. So that's another thing that the Boldness Project is trying to do, is to write a lot of this down. So as I said, we're struggling to figure out what kind of image could we use to talk about systems change. And again, I'm assuming a lot of people on the call probably have a good idea of, at a high level, what is systems change. I think where it gets quite interesting is when you get right down into the nitty gritty of it and say, what exactly is systems change? And so for us, it's about really paying attention to what families are saying. And so back to that child-centered model, families are telling us something. And so if we listen to what they say, and if we let that guide our work, then we think that will lead to systems change. This is an example of a user map that we created for one of our prototypes. It was a prototype centered on the Canada Learning Bond, which is an RESP program. And the data was telling us that, because you can go postal code by postal code across the country, and the data was telling us that our families in this particular neighborhood are not signing up at the rate that other families across the country were signing up. So our rates were lower than everybody else. So we wanted to understand why, and we wanted to see what could we do about that. And so we got our community leaders together, we talked a lot, then we did some design sessions, and we created a bit of a prototype. We worked with 4 of our community-based organizations, and we ran this prototype with 20 families. And so we targeted 20 families. Each organization was going to work with 5 families and run them through this prototype and test the prototype with them, and then get all that feedback from our families and to let us know what they said. And so the prototype itself, the first sort of white line you see there says awareness. The second line you see there says recruitment and incentive. Third is enrollment, and fourth is post-enrollment. And so all of these things happen when you go to sign up for the Canada Learning Bond. So the first area is, do people even know what the Canada Learning Bond is? So that's the awareness side. And sure enough, there's some work to be done there. And there is good work going on there, and that work needs to continue. But for Boldness, we didn't feel that was where the systems change, and from what our families were telling us about the biggest challenges, we didn't feel that was where we wanted to center our work. The recruitment and incentives, that was about, so now that you know about the Canada Learning Bond, do you want to sign up? Like, what would it take for you to want to sign up? Again, lots of work going on there, lots of good work that needs to happen. But from what our families were telling us, we didn't feel that was where we needed to really focus our systems change efforts. Third bar is enrollment. That's when you actually go through the process of signing up. That is where our families told us they had the biggest challenges. And quite frankly, one of the biggest challenges out of all the challenges was obtaining a birth certificate. And there's a lot of reasons for that I could go into with you, but I don't have the time. But just to say that our family said that was the biggest stumbling block for them in signing up for the Canada Learning Bond. And I'm going to circle back to that for a second. After the big round dot there you see is approved, that's once you've signed up for Canada Learning Bond. And then the fourth element is, after you've signed up, there's activities that you need to carry on in order to continue to receive that Canada Learning Bond every year. So now back to enrollment. So that is where our family said getting a birth certificate was sort of the first stumbling block. And once they got that, they could then get other ID. They could then get the relationship with the bank that they needed. They could then fill in the application that the federal government needed. It was just, often you'll hear in the systems change conversation, you need those, you got to find where those levers are so that you can flip those levers and so other things can flow. Well, we felt getting the birth certificate was one of those levers. So now, so that was our prototype, and we stick to that because the issue of the birth certificates has not been solved. And so we stick to the fact that our families told us that was the most important thing. Lots of people want to sort of slide over to awareness, and they want to build better brochures. And we need better brochures, and that work needs to happen. So I'm not minimizing that. But for our families, that wasn't the biggest thing. So, so I don't think strategies around awareness are going to lead to the systems change that our families are asking for. So that's an example of how, in one of our prototypes, how we're trying to sort of constantly be focused in on how are we changing systems with the activities that we're engaged in. So go to the next one here. Just a visual. Lots of you guys have all seen this stuff, I'm sure, if you've done any facilitating or if you've done any co-creation, co-design sessions. Social Innovation World loves our stickies. You know, we bring out our sticky gun, and so a lot of tools around just trying to surface some really good ideas, tools around how do we follow those ideas out a little bit, how do we get the different kinds of people into the room that don't normally talk to each other. That's the diversity principle around labbing. So, you know, sort of the unusual suspects, getting them in the room to talk to each other, and seeing what kinds of different conversations can surface, or seeing even the different value perspectives that people have, or seeing what people, what do people think is more important? You know, that often surfaces in different ways when we do these co-design sessions. So we do a lot of that here in terms of the prototyping, because we are a social lab platform. Here's a list of the prototypes that we currently have some involvement in at this time. There's 9 of them listed there. Excuse me. In that first year that we did the deep dive into community, and what the community told us resulted in our theory of change, the child-centered model. In addition to that, the community gave us lots of ideas about what they thought we need to work on in order to make things better for kids. And the list started off, you know, eventually got up to 70. We had to do a little bit of organizing, categorizing, and kind of collapsing some ideas into others. And so we got the list to about 40 is what we think we're working with. And so that was in the second year, we picked 5 out of that 40, and we had a way of figuring out which 5 we wanted to start with. There was a process we followed. And in the second year, we picked up another 4. And so these are the 9 broad categories that we're working in. And there's some sub-prototyping going on within these categories. And so if you really want to count them, I think we're in the neighborhood of about 15-ish, but they're under these broad categories. So again, lots of this on our website if you want to go back and look, but these are the prototypes we're working on. And now that we're into our 5th year, we're really struggling and trying to figure out how we can best scale these prototypes. So this is something, the other thing I want to say about the deep community wisdom in Point Douglas, I think this neighborhood is highly characterized by Indigenous populations, and it's highly characterized by newcomers to Canada populations. And therefore, that really flavors the model that we're talking about. It really flavors the values that we hold up, and it really flavors the way that we move forward. And so there's a lot of Indigenous knowledge guiding this project. And so I've used this visual a couple times to say that in social innovation world, we're quite often prompted to or encouraged to think outside the box. And so we do that here at Boldness. We try very hard to think outside the box. But in some ways, it's still a box that we're trying to think outside of. And so we feel the problems with the box. And so we're really always trying to figure out how to think inside the circle. And so for me, thinking inside the circle is where I naturally am, because that's my Indigenous upbringing and my Indigenous roots. And so trying to put things in boxes, or to try and do it in linear ways, or trying to do logic models sometimes really messes with my brain, because I think more circular, and I think more interconnected and overlapping, and like lots of gray. I'm good with lots of gray, like, because to me that's, you know, how things are so interconnected to one another. So we're trying, so that is a good, for me, a good representation of how it is that we're trying to really center Indigenous wisdom in this project, is by thinking inside the circle. And again, Galen talked about earlier and introduced the idea of collaboration. And so we have a lot of sophisticated Indigenous knowledge systems that are like old, like they're ancient and they're very sophisticated. And so clan system teachings is one of those Indigenous knowledge systems. And it talks about the need for all of the voices to be in the circle, and that all of those voices are interconnected, and all of those voices have a role. And so I draw upon, and I think this way when I think about the collaboration we're doing in Point Douglas. And so whose role is it to do what part? For us, centering the community's wisdom is the first step. And it's really listening to what families are saying to us about what they think is important, because you'll be surprised at how much in this world that does not happen. We design things for the end user, and we often don't talk to the end user in social service world. And maybe other worlds too. I'm a social worker by training, so I've worked around in the social services world for quite some time, and I'm telling you, we don't, we do a lot of case management. We don't do a lot of person-centered kind of planning. So I think there's a move now, though, towards that. So clan system teachings teach us that we listen to families, they tell us what they really need. We then go out and build our networks and build our allies, build our partners, build our relationships with other folks who we think can help get us there. And we feel that there's a role for almost everyone. And so we are very sensitive to this and very aware of this when we invite all the different diverse players into our sessions. And quite often we'll get folks saying, I don't think I'm supposed to be here. Like looking around the room, this is not my setting. I don't know who these people are. I don't know why I'm in this room. And so we often reply back, say, yes, you are supposed to be in this room for exactly that reason, because we're trying to get the different folks together to come up with all these different ideas and to take different, have different lenses on it. And then also to engage folks who think they're not a part of the solution or not part of the problem definition when really they are. And sometimes take sessions like that for folks to go, oh yeah, here is the thing I can connect to or the thing I can take on. So I'm just going to look quickly at my notes to make sure I've followed them. Part of, in the centering of Indigenous knowledge, I think, and using the tools that we have in our Indigenous knowledge systems like clan system teachings or medicine wheel teachings, we feel that work is reconciliation. And so, as I said earlier, the work or this neighborhood has often been characterized by all the negative things that go on here. But I've been very privileged to be a part of all the strength that goes on in this neighborhood. And I talked about that intergenerational set of leaders. They all come from this neighborhood, and they're the ones who started most of the social service organizations that are doing all the great work now. They're the ones who started all the coalitions. They're the ones who started, all of this working together and really trying to get back to that village that we need for our kids and families. And so, but I think not a lot of people outside of this neighborhood know that, and and the way that that wisdom itself, I don't think is well known outside of this neighborhood or across this country. And so, how can we use that wisdom to really make systems change when not too many people even know what it is, not too many people understand it, not too many people know how to engage with it or know how to use it. And so in this era of reconciliation, we're really holding this knowledge up and these values up and trying to offer it out there to anybody who wants to, anybody who's interested in it. We're trying to hold it up so that people can engage with it. And it's about, for me, it's at the heart of it, it's about having strong relationships. And when you're in strong relationships, you can have every kind of conversation, the hard ones, including the easy ones. You can feel safe enough and brave enough to have the tough conversations. We can have disagreements, we can have the tension, and yet we can still continue to work together to get to the other side of something. And so those of you out there who know, when you're in a bad relationship, just looking at somebody funny can cause World War III. But when you're in a good relationship, you can really say the dumbest thing and do the dumbest thing, and you will be given lots of space and lots of patience and lots of room, because people are going to walk with you and be gentle with you and help you be better. So that's what we're trying to do here at Boldness. And there's lots of different ways that we try to do it. I like to use the example of our stewardship group, which acts like our board of directors, again, who meet on a monthly basis. And so you see a picture of them there. the tall fella in the middle is a fellow who's a retired CEO. He was a 15-year, CEO of Wawanesa, I think it was. So highly corporate, male, Caucasian, and is a real leader in the philanthropy world here in Winnipeg. So really has raised a lot of money for a lot of great causes here in the city. And he's, standing there with another person who's in that picture is Dilly Knoll, who's one of the leaders here in this neighborhood, who runs an organization who's lived in this neighborhood her whole life, had a child, wanted to do better for her child, started volunteering at the school for her child. Next thing you know, it was a teacher assistant. Next thing you know, it was taking her Bachelor of Education. Next thing you know, it was the community leader. And next thing you know, it was the executive director of one of the most eminent or prominent organizations here in the North End. And so that story gets told over and over again here in the North End. We have our our provincial government partners sitting at the table at our stewardship group. We have one of our academic institutions, post-secondary institutions sitting there. We have the United Way of Winnipeg sitting there. We have the Manitoba Métis Federation sitting there. So the stewardship group itself represents the diversity that's in our city, and it shows how they can come together. And we have some very interesting conversations. And I think there's a high level of trust among each other in that circle. And so we have very robust conversations. Nobody, I don't think, feels that they can't say something, they can't ask something, that they can't question something. And, because if they really do have a concern, or if they just want to learn. So for me, the stewardship group is a real prime example of how deep and meaningful collaborations can occur. Now, I think I am close to being done. I think that the last thing I'll end on is the social lab platform and the Winnipeg Boldness Project really has had the benefit of holding space for all the diverse voices to come together and to allow time for those relationships to form and to create a place where the community feels that it can just be itself, just sort of throw all their ideas on the table in a really messed up way and not be judged by that. And then we can start sorting through it and figuring out what, and sense making what that means. And then taking those things forward into the, different systems in Winnipeg. And then it's those systems that are really trying to ask us, okay, so I don't understand this, or I don't know how to implement this, or I don't even know how this looks in my system. And so we're trying to, again, continue to create those relationships so we can continue to have those conversations. And as you all are aware, I wish I could say that the systems change was easy and that it came effortlessly, but it does not. We just have to keep plugging away at it. And for us, it means remaining really diligent about the community's voice and just not losing sight of that in all of our efforts moving forward. And one of the phrases I like to say is, in this reconciliation era, we really have moved out of the era of the hand out and have definitely been in an era of a hand up. And now we, in this collaboration vein, we really need to move towards a handshake. So with that, I am going to, I think it's pass it back to Galen.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you very much. Let me just quickly reactivate my webcam. Thank you very much, Diane. I was furiously scribbling notes here and just capturing all the things I was getting excited about. This is our Q&A portion of the webinar. So if you do have questions, please feel free to type them into the chat box that is there, or email Duncan, or send us a message on Twitter. But yeah, as I was listening to you, I heard so many different themes around the importance of community wisdom. And I think that's, I'm really excited we returned to that at the end and throughout. And also relationships was a really strong theme that came out for me, the importance of building relationships as a foundation for everything else. And I wanted to start there because that's something I'm really curious about. You highlighted that there's a need not only to collaborate within the neighborhood, but also outside the neighborhood. And recognizing that many people in our network or on this webinar today may not actually be members of the same neighborhood that their work impacts. So they may be in a regional hub somewhere, or they may actually not be located. What thoughts do you have on how people from outside a community can go about building strong relationships? If they're really interested in supporting the work of the community and supporting the growth of the community, how can they start building those types of strong relationships?
Ooh, well, I think there's lots of places to start. There's not any one place to start.
Yeah.
I think it is really, it's moving beyond the good intention, because I believe that we all wake up with the best of intentions every day. And so we all go about our day with the best of intentions, trying to do good in this world. So we have to take the second look, which is what are the outcomes of our good intentions? And so, because I'm not calling anybody a bad person here. That's why I say people have good intentions. But when we look at what's happening to our families in the North End, there's some very bad outcomes. And so we just need to be really clear about why is that, without any blame, shame, or anything like that. Like, let's just look at it. So in Manitoba, we have 11,000 children in the care of Child and Family Services, and about upwards of 90% of those kids are Indigenous, right? So, the intention is to keep kids safe. The outcome is that 95% of the kids in care are Indigenous. That does, and I will tell you, Indigenous people are not bad parents. I will tell you that it's not because Indigenous people don't know how to parent their children. This is not an individual capacity issue. This is a systems issue. The system is taking more and more, they're taking them in earlier, like right from the hospital at times, and they're staying for longer. So that's a systems issue, right? So that's the outcome, and that's the thing we need to take a hard look at, like, why is that happening? And part of figuring out why is that happening for me is about talking directly to the people that we're talking about, because they will tell you and give you the best insight. Now, granted, not just anyone can blow into this neighborhood and have a conversation with somebody walking down the street. I understand that. So for us, the strategy has been to work through our community-based organizations. So we have a pretty good, and this is sort of the Boldness team, lots of our teammates here have long-standing relationships in this community. And so we have a lot of trusting folks that, folks that trust us, that we trust. But pretty much the folks that are closest to our families are our community-based organizations. And so that's who we go to. And they, because, because the families trust them, we can sometimes get access to families. And, and I'll use Andrew Street Family Center as one example. If we're partnering with Andrew Street, families will trust us because it's Andrew Street, and because Andrew Street said we're okay. So families will say, okay, well, it's good. It's okay to talk to them because, Andrew Street said it's okay. But I think we also, our staff have a very similar value set and approach. And I'm back to that theory of change there, that child-centered model. We both have that same sort of value set in terms of individuals. And this is, again, me ranting a little, but it is very surprising to me how often I will hear in systems conversations with folks who work in systems, how pervasive the thought is that our families don't know what they need. Like, if our families are too much into child welfare, too much into drugs, too much into incarceration, too uneducated, unemployed, you name it. Because our families are facing those challenges and multiple challenges all at once, all the time, that somehow they don't know. And I challenge that thought every single time. So if you think families don't know, that right there is the start of the problem, because then you're not going to rely on them for the solution or the problem identification, for that matter.
Absolutely. And I think that, a lot of what I was thinking about when you were speaking, particularly in that last little bit, is how we end up being on kind of opposite sides in some way, a part of the system or part of community, and how those misconceptions can really form. So I think you've highlighted this a few times throughout, that there is work that needs to be done in terms of how our systems relate and work with families, how our systems support families. And I know you mentioned that you're in year 5, kind of looking ahead to what's next, and that's kind of a struggle. Do you have any sense of what is next? What sorts of things you'll be moving forward on to try and effect that kind of change?
Well, I mean, there's high level theoretical stuff, right? So obviously, and I sort of said it already, about really trying to form strong relationships so that we can think about how we can shift some systems around, but keeping it very practical at the same time. And sort of another example I was thinking about while you were talking was, we have a street here called Selkirk Avenue, and it's a pretty well-known street. And there's lots of folks doing work on that street. So there's a lot of doors to buildings on that street. And so most of the doors on that street, you can open the door, walk in, and quite a few of those doors will have a couch, a coffee, a place to land, a telephone maybe, a warming, welcoming, inviting place. And so families feel that they belong. They're not an imposition. There's some comfort there. There's usually also a person there who will say, hey, can I help you? Or is there some, can I show you around? Or, there's toast over here, whatever, what have you. Right next door to that, you can walk into a door and you open the door and it's a waiting room and it's a plexiglass and there's signs all over that say, don't be rude to me or I'll kick you out. And then take a number and, if you missed your number, too bad, call me on my voicemail and I'll see if I can get back to you. Like, just basic, that's to me speaks to some very basic relational questions, right? And these two doors can be side by side on the same street. Now you tell me about how is the person who walks into one of those doors going to feel and act and think versus if they walk in the other door. Like, there's some simple stuff we can do here, and so it doesn't all have to be the heavy duty, let's change policy,
Yeah.
Sometimes it's just about, can we just not have plexiglass? Like, I don't know. And I'm telling you, we're talking about the same families. And I have this conversation with systems people all the time because people think that the plexiglass is protecting them from people. And I'm like, well, but the door right next to you and the door on the other side of you have a couch and a coffee, and it's the exact same people that are walking in those doors. And feels the need for protection there. Right. And so again, I think it's how we treat people. Like, if we're going to treat people like hardcore, then I think they're going to act hardcore. Like, if you treat humans, oh my word, they're going to act like humans. Anyway.
No, thank you. I think I really like as well that that's, something that we can take away regardless of where we are and what our work is, that there are ways that we can each really focus on building relationships and building those kinds of environments.
Gail, and the other thing I will say, and again, so much of this sounds like common sense to me, but it's how do you actually implement this stuff? The other word I would use in relationship is the reciprocity. And so with boldness, I would love if everybody came here and just did what the thing we need them to do, right? Because that's our work and that's what we need. But it doesn't work that way. Reciprocal relationships don't work that way. So boldness also has to go out there and be a part of this community. And we have to contribute and, be here on stuff that doesn't exactly smack of boldness, that's reciprocity. So I go and I hang out and so does the staff here. We participate in other things that people find important. And it's important that we're there and participating and helping and just, experiencing it. So when we are trying to form those relationships, try to think about reciprocities. Not only what do you need, but and people will ask you for stuff that you go, oh, I don't really, that's not my mandate, or I don't really I don't have a budget for that, or that's really I don't know how I'm going to convince my boss of that, that I could go spend time doing that. You gotta have the tough conversations.
Yeah, thanks. We had a number of questions come through. I think one that I got really excited about, a question from Heidi, who is interested in learning more about how you identified stakeholders for the different guide groups. How you went through this process of narrowing down who to ask, how to kind of build long-term participation, and also making sure that in this process you're you're getting an accurate representation across the community. What that process of forming guide groups was like for you.
So a couple things. So we're pretty open. So the invitation is always open. And so we'll always let everybody know whoever wants to come can come. Again, recognizing that there's a group of long-standing relationships at play in this neighborhood. So sometimes people come because I've asked them to, and because that what I just said to you about the reciprocal thing, because I go when they ask me to. So I think we all share the same vision. So having a strong vision that people agree to is key. We try to be really respectful of people's time. Like, we don't have meetings just for the sake of having meetings. We try to be very concise with our meetings. And I think the meetings are what we're asking our guide groups, I think is very meaningful. And I think people are feeling like what we're asking is a very serious thing and that we really need their input on. And I think they see us taking their input and doing something with it. So it's not just sitting on a shelf somewhere. I also have teachings from my elders about energy. And so while we keep the invitation wide open to whoever wants to come, and I'm constantly inviting people to come, and I have lots of coffee with a lot of people, because, and I will just talk about dogs or cats or something, but it's just relationship forming, right? And so, and once people connect with you in that way, they will come because they're interested. But at the same time, not everybody comes. And so part of it is some people are just too busy, or just it's not their thing. So I can respect that. But when it comes to our families, I'm always looking at Kate. So I'm going to give the example. My stewardship group, they all drive to this office. They all come here for the 3-hour meeting. And most of them, and we just usually have sandwiches, most of them don't even eat the sandwich because they're rushing off to the next meeting, or they're rushing off to the next thing where they're going to have food or dinner or something, or they just finished having breakfast or something like that. So they come, we're concise, we're in, out, Our parent guide group, a lot of our parents will have to get on a bus for an hour just to get here. And so we look at their what are the barriers and challenges to their participation? So we will pay for their transportation. We will make sure there's extras food, so not only are they eating here, but they get to take some home. We'll do honorariums. Like, those are the most expensive meetings to have, because those folks typically don't have the finances to participate, and we're not going to let the finances be a barrier to participation. So, so we take away all those barriers, and then when our families get here and actually contribute, and I said that earlier, they really feel like they're driving this project, and they really feel that they're being represented in the wording. And so, for instance, I'll use wording on the wording one, prototype. When we went into the neighborhood, like, we're labbing and prototyping and experimenting and testing, you can tell that went over really well. Yeah. And so when we said we were prototyping, we had the conversation about what is that? And it was the idea of, trying something on and trying to see if it will work and trying to see if it had any merit. So that was the possibility part. And then we needed to generate some evidence around that prototype, right? So we're collecting some data here and there and feedback and insights about that prototype. So that was the proof part, generating proof. So our community called our prototypes proofs of possibility. So now we have to go around explaining what proofs of possibility is. Prototype. So the language, even, making sure that there's, and so, a holistic model for ways of knowing, being, doing, and feeling, everybody goes, what? And then you say a child-centered model. Then they go, oh, so even language is a thing that, people need to feel connected to and represented in the work we're doing. And then I'm not sure what else that might have been asked in that question about how, so what I mostly heard was the inclusion thing. Again, open door, but not everybody comes. And so we're always constantly trying to connect and reach out as much as our resources allow us to. And whenever somebody pops up, like, you try to invite them in.
Great. Yeah, that was a really comprehensive kind of covering all these aspects of how to bring people in. So yeah, I appreciate that. We had another question come in, which I think touches on where we landed a little bit and some of our conversations around scale. So the question, if I can do it justice, is really about the challenge of scaling knowledge and wisdom that is local. Understanding that there is wisdom and expertise in other neighborhoods and other places. So the question is, how do we scale local learnings while respecting the wisdom and learnings of other places? And then the follow-up question, if you're curious, is specifically which aspects of the wisdom from Point Douglas and from what you've been surfacing, what elements of that do you think should be scaled and shared?
So that is a dynamic conversation, and so there's no answer to that.
Yeah.
But I'll tell you what the insights we've learned is that for me, I just think if you're in really good relationship, that is going to go a long, long way. We have lots of conversations around here about cultural appropriation.
Mm-hmm.
So, when we're using certain knowledge systems like medicine wheel teachings or what have you, I don't personally think that anybody owns that knowledge, but there's a way to engage with that knowledge in a very respectful way. And so we're always taking guidance from our elders in terms of the medicines, like making sure we're always using ceremony and tobacco. So we're trying to follow the protocol around these knowledge systems. And then we're trying to work with systems who know nothing about it and trying to also share in the most appropriate way and really trying to talk about role, right? So, we have a lot of curriculum because we do some train the trainer stuff here. And so whose role is appropriate in teaching certain things, right? And sometimes it's just not your role. And so that might not be the most efficient way to get it done, but it's not the most appropriate way to get it done. So, how do we bring in the different folks who can take on those different roles in the scaling? And I talk about the knowledge transfer, I think, because part of scaling is about knowledge transfer in my mind. So there's ways to be appropriate about that. Some folks, again, so well-intentioned, they just don't know. And they come to us and say, I just don't know how, can you help me, right? And do you have something that can help me? And so those are the folks we work mostly with. We haven't really taken a big run at the ones who are stuck and nope, and the wall's up and they're just not willing. Like, we haven't worked with the unwilling yet, so that's a whole other conversation to have. But yeah, we're just trying to be that open, safe, brave place where people can have the conversations about how do we take this information, how do we scale it? Because it's pretty, I think the child-centered model, I think, is very loving and it's very gentle, and I think it's very kind. And so most people want it and they want to figure out how to do it. And so we're trying to come up with all kinds of strategies and all kinds of tools to help people figure that out.
Great, thank you very much. Yeah, I absolutely look forward to seeing what you continue to work on and what that looks like. We're unfortunately out of time for questions. But for those of you who do have questions, we've collected a few of them. Please do send them our way afterwards, and we'll do our best to collect them. So thank you, Diane, for taking the time just to share a little bit of the work that is being done in Point Douglas. Again, I really appreciated your perspective. I think there's a lot all of us can take away from that work. So best of luck to you moving forward, and thank you very much for sharing with us.
Well, thank you for being interested.
And I'll turn it over to Duncan, who I think has some closing announcements.
Thanks, Galen. Yeah, just a few short announcements about some learning opportunities that are coming up quickly. The first is actually coming to both Winnipeg and Guelph, Ontario, and it's entitled Human-Centered Design for Community Change. And it's coming to Winnipeg October 23rd and Guelph on October 26th. And you can join us for some simple practical tools and approaches to put human-centered design theory into practice in your own community change initiatives. The Winnipeg workshop will also feature the Winnipeg Boldness Project, so be sure to secure your spot for this unique opportunity to learn how to include these design elements in your own context. We also have an event coming up called Prototyping for Community Change, also coming to both Winnipeg and Guelph. You can join Galen and learn how to prototype new ideas and programs and discover how to scale up your prototypes to make an impact in your own community. Learners from the earlier Human-Centered Design workshop will also receive a discount for the prototyping event. And finally, we've also launched our Evaluation and Design Evaluating Systems Change events running from November 13th to 14th in Calgary, Alberta. You can come and join Mark Kabaj and Galen McCluskey as they explore one of the most critical challenges in today's evaluation landscape, designing evaluations for systems change. This workshop is for you if you manage programs that need to be evaluated, you're part of a collaborative that is trying to understand how to evaluate your progress, you're a community development professional who wants to make the connection between learning and systems change, or you are in a collective impact network wanting to understand shared measurement. You can be sure to check out the link below, which will also be included in the email coming to your inbox this week, where you'll also receive a recording of this call and any links or resources mentioned. And I finally just wanted to take the opportunity to thank both Diane and the Winnipeg Boldness Project for joining us and sharing their wisdom and insights. I hope everyone has enjoyed the presentation, and I hope you have a wonderful day.